Just loading now. And we're live.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order and acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Councilman Bell and I are present, and Councilman Buchanan, Chairman Buchanan, will be joining us shortly. First item on the agenda is the approval of previous meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, I'll second it. Any discussion, any changes? Hearing none. Do I have a vote?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Okay, next item on the agenda is citizens' comments. I believe we have 6 of them, which we'll read.
All right. The first one is from Beatrice Love, 9 Sandollar Drive, excuse me. I wish council would change weekly rentals to minimum 30 days in residential neighborhoods like Wildwood. Yesterday, while trying to enjoy my pool, I was subjected to 15 minutes on nipple piercing, followed by 20 minutes of one woman's family planning. Then the music started. Children playing is one thing, but personal chatter is abhorrent. The only thing livability can affect is the music. These short-term rentals have ruined my previously peaceful lifestyle on Isle of Palms. I am a 24-year resident. I built here when Wildwood covenants prohibited anything under 90-day leasing. Please save our neighborhoods of Wildwood and Forest Trails. Change the rentals to 30 days. Susie Wheeler, 3205 Hartnett. Please, please, please give us some greens. Give us the green space we've been asking and voting for. Do not muddy the waters, revisiting the decision made last April. Christine Donovan, 31 26th Avenue. I am respectfully asking that you do not reopen the conversation about asking for an RFP for the area being vacated by tidal wave. I believe that residents have spoken very clearly that they prefer a free public area for that small location at the Marina. As I have watched the debate unfold over the last few years, I have witnessed support for tidal wave that has been marketed and pushed by tidal wave and personal friends and employees of tidal wave. However, there has not been a big outcry from residents for jet skis and parasailing. Since tidal wave is no longer a leaseholder as of October 1st, I am respectfully asking that you move forward with what the residents have indicated and ask the council to vote for making that an area a free and public area. I understand and trust that the lease for the new restaurant is well underway and being carefully reviewed by the members of your committee. I also understand that this committee has spent an inordinate amount of time dealing with marina issues. Would it be advisable to recommend that a separate committee be formed specifically for marina management, perhaps after the next election? Vincent DeGangi, 4 42nd Avenue. I want to thank this committee for the work that you all have completed to date. The residents' concerns and desires has certainly shown through in your work product. Would the committee include the 42nd Avenue ADA compliant boardwalk update, discussions on the review of other beach paths for this project? In earlier emails, residents, parentheses me, have forwarded possible alternatives, i.e. 34A, 49, 50, 52nd, or 53rd Avenue. I would like to hear where we stand on their evaluation. Craig Stephen Wheeler, 3205 Hartnett. After considering the options, I prefer green space at the IOP Marina. Kathleen O'Brien Allen, 32 26th Avenue. Please at least let the residents vote on this decision if possible. Jamie Zarella, 104 Forest Trail. I wanted to reach out in support of an appropriate and public review of renewing a lease for tidal wave. This longtime business that has served the island well for many years has been strung along by the Isle of Palms for too long. There has not been full public disclosure as to why the lease would not be renewed. It is one thing to offer very favorable lease terms for IOP and have them rejected, but there has been no clearly communicated reason as to why a new lease would not be offered in the first place. They have a minimal footprint and few parking spaces. If the goal is only to add these spaces to the restaurant lease, the loss of a great small business that assists the fire department seems very short-sighted. At this meeting, please communicate very clearly each rental property committee member's stance. Thanks. And that completes your public comments.
Thank you. Next item is Marina tenant comments. Do we have any of those?
No, we did not receive any comments from the current Marina tenant.
Okay. All right, moving along, we get to old business. 5A, update on the Marina dock permitting and dock rehabilitation project.
All right, a quick update on the Marina dock rehabilitation project. As you all know, the bid package is out and has been out for several weeks. We had a deadline for questions that was due about 10 days ago, and we received a lot of interest, a lot of questions, really good questions. And Kirby and I decided to extend the deadline for submission of proposals through this Friday. Originally, it was last Friday, and we felt like giving prospective contractors an additional week to review the answers to the questions and make the necessary adjustments to their bid proposal. So we're expecting that by 11 o'clock on September 11th. You all recall that there were a couple addendums that were included, so that was another reason why we wanted to give them enough time to really study it and provide accurate numbers. So that's where we are on that. We are still expecting to meet our deadline for council to consider. If we get a really good proposal and we feel ready to make a recommendation at this point, for council and Ways and Means to consider the following Tuesday and get going with the original schedule for that project to be ready to, for the city to be ready to issue a notice to proceed by September 30th, October 1st. Then related to the pending and open permit process for the water sports operation dock, we have still not received the Army Corps of Engineers permit. We got word from our representative there that it's still under review. So no more information on that and when the city should expect that permit. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Next item, update on Marina restaurant lease proposal.
So as you all know, council last month engaged some attorneys from Hainsworth, Sinclair & Boyd for the development of the lease agreement document. That has been done and has been submitted to the IOP families for review. And they had it for a little over a week, and we received their comments and feedback from their attorney yesterday evening. So we are in the process of reviewing that document. Ourselves, John, Debbie, myself, and our attorneys. And we are trying to schedule a meeting for Friday morning for an internal review and discussion, and then be ready to present that to City Council next Tuesday.
Wonderful. Next item, update on proposed ADA compliant beach walkover at 42nd Avenue.
And I asked Douglas to join us for this conversation. We've had some internal discussions between the two of us about next steps, and we felt like we needed and wanted a little bit more clarity from the committee about the direction that we're going. It seemed clear from the last real property meeting that there was not a whole lot of excitement about the idea of cutting vegetation and adding a boardwalk to the existing path, which is initially what we had envisioned and what we presented in the grant application, to not change what's currently there, which is used for vehicular access for emergency purposes, and then adding a path, a wide ADA compliant, 8 foot wide, I believe, adjacent to that. And that way we could safely segregate pedestrian beach traffic from vehicular beach traffic. But it seemed like, that generated some pushback from the residents of that area. I believe Councilmember Bell also had questions and concerns about removing any vegetation. So I wanted Douglas to kind of give us a visual of what that would look like. And then the alternatives and the options that the city could consider if that's not the way that we want to go. We have some examples of other arrangements that are in place in other beach communities that do provide some level of handicap accessible access to the beach that's not necessarily a boardwalk. So we wanted to show you that. And we wanted to also talk about, as it was, I think, included in one of the comments, if there was any additional conversation between the committee about looking at an alternate location as a viable option for an ADA boardwalk rather than 42nd. Douglas and I were talking about, and I think we discussed it at length last month about the benefits of this particular location when it comes to having existing parking, wide enough, flat enough to sustain what we had envisioned. But obviously that comes with some concerns about potentially increasing traffic or increasing activity down that path. So let's start, if that's okay with you all, with Douglas sort of walking us through what we had originally envisioned for that location and for that path, and then we can show. I'll pull it up, Douglas, on my end. I'll pull up the alternative from Hilton Head, the example from Hilton Head, and we can talk about pros and cons for that. And then we can hopefully get some clarity from you all about how we proceed.
So I would just add to what Desiree has said. When we started at 42nd, the reason we started there is the city was hearing, and it was a pretty limited number of folks, but they were pretty vocal about the challenges that ADA or people with physical disabilities were facing with the ramps that were being built at the time. So we built a ramp at where Pavilion hits Ocean, and we had built a ramp at 21st, and we had added a Moby Map at, I guess it was fifth or 9th, but people were starting to attend meetings saying, look, what you're doing meets the standards for ADA accessibility, but those of us with challenges still really have a hard time getting to the beach because you're going up these ramps, and because you have to go 2 feet above the dune, and because the dune is sometimes 5-6 feet above grade, it leads to a very long trek up that ramp to get to the top, and then a very long trek down. So the staff was tasked with finding the location that really would be the gold standard for ADA accessibility. So we could kind of say, hey, if you really have challenges, this is the place to go. We've made it the absolute best that we can do on this island. And we chose 42nd primarily because it was flat. There was not a primary dune in that location that required the uphill ramp and the downhill ramp. It also was short, so those with challenges could park right on the street and then have a relatively short trek to the beach. And also there was already parking and some semblance there. We added a space, but there was already parking there, and it was kind of an established beach parking area. Yet it was also a little bit off the beaten path. So that's really why we chose 42nd. And that was a long time ago. We have gone back out and looked at how the terrain has changed, and there probably are some alternatives. In my personal opinion, they're still not quite as good as 42nd. 37th is relatively flat, but it would be a much longer path, which would translate to being a more expensive path to construct. Also, because it's longer, people with disabilities would have a longer trip to the beach. So from our review, after hearing the comments, I think we feel like 42nd is probably still the best. If the goal is to make the best path for those with challenges, kind of at the lowest cost to the city and getting the most bang for the buck, it probably is still 42nd Avenue. But if you all wanted to pivot, we also, at the time, we felt like it would be beneficial to separate vehicular traffic from potentially wheelchair traffic or other pedestrians, that separation would be good of having two paths. But some things to consider would be, and I think kind of where the staff is a little bit at a standstill, is would we just continue pretty much as we had planned with a new path adjacent to the existing vehicular path at 42nd? That would be one option. The other option would be to combine, basically to improve the path that's there with a better surface than Moby Map, which has a tendency to bulge up, to move. It shifts with time. It gets covered over pretty easily. We've identified an alternate surface that we think is more stable. The problem with that alternative is you are not separating the wheelchair traffic from the public safety traffic. I think I don't know how frequently they go down that path. I don't think it's all day, every day. So it probably would be a pretty limited issue, but you would still have it. The third alternative, I think, would be to look at an entirely new location, and 37th might be the best, but we think that to move it to 37th, there'd be some benefit, but we think it would roughly double the cost of the project. So that's basically what we think are three viable options. Press ahead as we've planned with two paths. Second would be to improve the path that we have to be as good as it could be. Or third would be to move the path to the next best alternative, which we think is probably 37.
Ryan, you're back.
Yes, thank you. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, separate, multiple issues here. If we did 37th, and correct me if I'm wrong, we'd have to add handicap parking on the parallel position. Right. Where currently, we're looking at paid parking. So that's a little bit problematic, not just the cost. I will go on record and say I'm very opposed to widening the path and cutting through vegetation. To me, that just, it's basically cutting a road through there, and not a path. And I think when it first came up for discussion quite a while ago, I was under the impression we were looking at improvements to the Moby Map, which has, kind of been a constant problem. The one that's there now is better than the one that was there before that. And if it's simply, in essence, a resurface, I don't, that is the beach when I go. I think I've been twice this year. It's not a thoroughfare for emergency vehicles to come through. So I don't see that it's problematic that, you having a dual use path, that it's wheelchairs, which are limited number, emergency transport, which is also limited. But this idea of, sort of doubling and cutting through existing vegetation, I think is bad precedent. I think it would look horrible. And I think, the decision that should be in front of us, do we want to resurface the Moby Map and have, the two, Desiree, we're going to eliminate that term, observation deck. Two,
on the agenda, right?
Yeah, I know. No, it is now. I'm picking on you. Because everybody had this bird observation deck picture in mind when this first came before council. But, if it's a place where people step aside with their strollers, with their wheelchairs, and take a pause and a rest on their way down to the beach, that's fine. But I will tell you, I'm not in favor. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of 37th, because I don't think we have the money to double the expense and go through that. It's sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down on, do we resurface the Moby Map, probably add one or two handicap parking places, which I think, regardless of what we do, should be added to 42nd Avenue, and decide what we do from there. So I've kind of said my piece. Thank you.
Ron, you're muted.
Go ahead, Desiree.
So I just have a question about how, if the plan is to move forward with improving the existing area and maybe expanding it, and not expanding it by adding another walkover, but combining the use so that it is ADA compliant, but still vehicular access. Not sure how we can incorporate the observation deck that we're not calling an observation deck, the areas next to it where people can maybe step aside, and those that can't navigate close, easily in the soft sand can still have a place to sit and maybe watch the sunset.
Maybe a dome.
And I think with that, I think the idea of having that spot off to the side was because if you were going to have a walkover, I mean, it was only wide enough for one person. So if you had to pass, you basically had to have a place to get off to the side. I think we just go through, refurbish. I'd like to see some of the materials that Douglas come up with, make that path wider, make it more stable, whatever the materials it is. You can have two-way traffic on it. There's no need to have any type of, observation deck or path to get off to the side. I think either way. There we go. I think either way, we can do something. And if we were able to do this, I would like to see if there's any savings in, kind of using a different material, is to look at other, improving some of the other beach access paths, maybe along Ocean Boulevard, and Douglas, this is my question to you. I know we've talked about, there's some spots in Ocean that have a pretty flat terrain, but I think once you get to the dune line, is it the line over top the dune down to the hard sand is what really becomes a problem?
Yes, it's right at that oceanfront dune.
Yeah. It becomes steep.
That's right. That's the problem. You can't exceed a 12-to-1 ramp.
Right.
It's a pretty, and you have to be 2 feet above the dune. So it can be a large difference in terrain that you're trying to cross with only a 12-to-1 slope, which makes either for a lot of switchbacks, but any way you do it, it's a pretty long trip up and down.
Got it. That's what I thought. But yeah, anyway, I'd like to see some other options for that 42nd area. And if there are cost savings that we could apply elsewhere, whether it's any one of the other spots, but it's, I think it's okay.
Well, this is something that exists. Are you all seeing the picture?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is an option that was pulled out of Hilton Head. There are some concerns about maintenance there because it's very easy for it to be covered with sand. And we have another picture that I'm trying to pull up that shows that. So it's high maintenance, and it covered with sand ultimately, kind of beats the purpose of it being somewhat ADA compliant. So that
Desiree, to that, how is that different in the Moby Map though, in terms of getting covered with sand?
It's not a whole lot of difference, but that's why the Moby Map becomes problematic for some folks when it is covered with sand. Let me see if I can pull up.
The main advantage of that surface over Moby Mat is Moby Mat has a tendency to bulge, and this would not, because it's a more rigid material. It would still be subject to getting covered with sand, but it should stay relatively flat.
Yeah.
But it would require some routine maintenance and clearing of the sand off of it. As Desiree said, it's been used in Hilton Head. We have we reached out to them about it, and I don't know if you can share the photo, but it is very frequently covered with sand, and that would be the downside of this one versus elevating what we had kind of originally proposed of being slightly elevated. Yeah, that's a picture of the Hilton Head one in another location. And we would do that material wide enough and have it designed so that vehicular traffic would not damage it. And we did have a brief conversation with the supplier, and they indicated that it can be designed specifically for heavy vehicular use.
Douglas, assuming it wouldn't be any wider than the existing Moby Map, right, where that traverse is going down through the vegetation.
It would be.
That's used for full-size pickup trucks now.
I think that I may be wrong, but I think that full-size pickup trucks put a tire off of it. I could be mistaken about that, but it would be approximately the same width. It might be. I have it in my mind that Moby Mat is a slightly odd. I think it comes from France, and it's just a little bit. I think it's 7 feet wide for some reason. Where we would make it a full, not maybe a foot wider, so you get both tires onto it.
Well, I'd like to see some of the pricing on that and what it would take, and if what that cost difference was before we move forward and say yay or nay on it.
Can I ask a point of clarification? Randy, you mentioned adding parking spaces, and my feeling from the meeting with the community was that was part of their objection, and I just want to be sure that
if I might address that, because I know that community pretty well. I just think, as a community with a population the age that we have, that is resident parking, right? So, there's kind of three issues going on down there for me. There's one handicap parking place between there and 21st, period, right? That just, we've got to make a choice as a community. Public streets are public streets, regardless of the people that live there. Nothing changes. It's residents. I understand ADA and handicap spaces are open to any and all, but having one spot is not acceptable. And I kind of, and Ron Hanna, don't comment on this, but I look at myself as the next generation that might require one of those parking places. And I think we've got to be cognizant of that as a community. The issues that we have there are, potentially filling up the parking places. And I think the most serious problem we have down there is enforcement of golf carts. It's not whether they're residents or non-residents. We have a ton of unregistered, uninsured golf carts that consume. Many of them are appended to rental homes. And if we get serious about its resident parking, all we're talking about is taking away, one or two parking places potentially from residents. I don't see it as a traffic problem. I don't see it as an increase in beach usage problem. And then we will have solved the structural issue of getting down, beyond the dunes in a more stable surface. And I apologize, but I try to separate these into three things. I would do at least one additional handicap spot if we do nothing else over there.
And I've talked, I've reached out and I've talked to Desiree about that as well, and maybe even using, we still have that offer from TrueGrid to do a sampling of stabilization of parking spots, and we can utilize that. And we've talked about utilizing it there as well to mark the handicap parking spots. But definitely, I'd like to go ahead and see some numbers on that and see what it would come back as before we pull the trigger on it and see what it takes.
So I need to also, we'll be reaching out to the Greenbelt program and the Greenbelt board for their guidance on, still being able to use those funds, even though the concept may change slightly by not adding a boardwalk. So I need to do a little bit of research about what we need to do on our end to still be considered an eligible project.
And I would emphasize the fact that we're trying to preserve green space, and the dune line and the natural vegetation, and we figured this is a better concept.
And the other benefit of that is if this becomes a less expensive option, then we would have additional monies available to address other areas, other beach paths that we may not be able to do an ADA compliant path, but we could do something like Milton has in some of their beach access paths that called footbridges. At least, you know, at a portion before it starts getting into the dune system. So we would have the ability to still use those funds for other eligible activities around the island.
So for Desiree's point, Ryan, should we just, as a committee, tell them to kill the idea of 37th Avenue because we don't have double the fund? Yeah.
Yeah,
I would vote for that.
yeah, I don't think we necessarily need a motion, and I'd just say we're not going to pursue it right now,
Yeah.
but still continue. We're still working on 42nd Avenue.
Yep. Agree.
Okay.
I guess just for clarity, I'm not sure if we should, the committee should consider making some sort of motion so we can bring this up to full council, because the plan to move forward with that boardwalk as the city's application for Greenbelt funding was approved by full council. And if we're not pursuing that route, or maybe we're not there yet, if we just want to learn and find more information about the option before making that final determination.
Well, I'll make a motion if we need to, Desiree.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd make a motion that we entertain replacing the existing Moby Map with a vehicle with suitable structure, investigating the cost, and bring it back before Real Property Committee for review without damaging existing vegetation in the surrounding area.
In lieu of a new boardwalk.
Right.
And Randy, in that motion and in that cost that comes back to you, you also, do I understand you to say you want to include the cost of 2 additional parking spaces out of the True Grid material?
I mean, that's a
Either
question, Desiree and Ryan. That's probably a public safety issue, Ryan, committee-wise.
We can address that. Mhm.
Yeah.
That'll be separate. Okay.
Yeah, we can add that to that agenda for Monday. If Ryan wants to.
No, that's definitely, yeah.
I want to second that motion.
I second.
Thank you.
Okay, give me a second. Let me go over this.
We got to
Okay.
vote.
Yep, I was looking at the agenda. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. Moving on.
You showed up at a perfect time.
I know. What's interesting, I didn't realize last week, we got hit by lightning outside the house and it fried everything. And I never hooked my computer back up again. So since then, I had issues signing in. Okay. The next item on the agenda under new business, I had asked for under new business to put in improvements to walkways previously, but it didn't make the agenda.
I have it on my agenda. Do y'all have a different one?
Not on the publish.
Yeah, I don't have it.
I don't have it.
Oh, so that was an error on our end then. Yes, the chair
that didn't
requested adding under new business discussion of improvements to other beach access paths that continue to flood. Because it's a non-action item, committee, you all can entertain a motion to add it to the agenda for discussion.
I'll make a motion to add it.
Second.
All those in favor of adding to the agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It's kind of funny. This kind of piggybacks on our last discussion. And,
I'm sorry, I apologize for that.
that's not a problem. One of the reasons I want to address it, I felt like this committee was probably one of the best ones to, start looking at some of those improvements. And one of the things we constantly hear is, especially recently with all the flooding of these beach access paths, and people have to wading through, ankle deep, knee deep water that sometimes stands there for days, if not weeks, and trying to evaluate some of those areas. And Douglas took off already. Those areas where we can really look at some of the problem areas and create those elevated footbridges and find funding sources, whether it's grant funding, whether it's, who knows if county's going to give us anything anymore, but whether it's county or any other type of funding that we can do that. But if we can get it just for discussion, if we can start the process of evaluating, whether that's going to be, doing surveying or, some type of topographical low-lying areas and some of the problematic areas. I don't know if any of you guys want to add in on that.
Ryan, I just think it's timely with looking at paid parking that we put the funds to intended use to improve the access to the beach.
Yeah. That's one of those, yeah, one of those sources, yeah. Kevin?
Totally agree. I know I might have mentioned this before, but the two paths we use on either side of 32nd, you're in knee-deep water getting to the beach after it rains. And then the mosquitoes are there for a week. So.
Mhm. Well, and we have looked at this in the past, and we'd have to reevaluate and reassess the list that we had previously, because again, it changes every year depending on the elevation. What we have found in the past is that what we have done in some places is bring in sand or bring in fill. But the problem with that, if we elevate that beach path, then you have potentially a flooding problem, because that water then just migrates onto the adjacent property. So,
Correct.
you know, the foot bridges, it's costlier, you know, it costs more, and it's more maintenance, because it's something that we have to keep up. You know, if a board breaks or a hurricane damages it, but it's really, you know, really the most feasible, I guess, alternative to address the flooding issue. And again, Greenbelt funds are going to continue to come every year, and those beach communities typically use them for that kind of project. So it's certainly something that we would have funding for through that program.
Yeah,
We
I
can
really
certainly provide a list for next meeting about these locations, and maybe seek input from the community and from you all about those locations that you have witnessed the significant flooding.
Yeah, I really want to stay away from the idea of filling, you know, and bringing up the elevation heights and creating. I think that really what all that does is it becomes that whack-a-mole problem again, where you put
Right.
in one area, it's just gonna, you know, you cause a problem to go somewhere else, and we really don't want to do that. And then, you know, cause problems on the adjacent neighboring properties.
Mm-hmm.
And it really goes against our code, because we have to bring it up, you know, we have to bring up the elevation so high. So, but yeah, if we can start looking at that and start pulling some pricing together and start working towards putting it into, you know, next year's budget and seeing what our costs are going to be out of the parking program. Perfect.
Yep.
What else we got? Anybody else? Looks like we have miscellaneous business. Next meeting date is Wednesday, October 7th already. Does anybody have a problem with that? We'll keep that on there.
Yeah, no, sir. I'm
Okay.
good.
Perfect. And then we have executive session. Do we need to go to executive session?
No, sir.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Off record at 1:38.
Thank you all for
Bye.